Okay, so the session is called Supporting Hospice Fundraisers to be Resilient, and I have to declare an interest in why I push for this topic to be on the agenda, as for 10 years I was a local fundraiser before joining Hospice UK in 2015, where part of my remit is to work with fundraising teams across the sector. Responsible for raising more than £1 billion of voluntary income each year, the hospice fundraising environment is becoming ever more difficult. Income streams are reaching maturity and there is increasing competition, not least from our friends in the NHS, for the local fundraising pound. Combined with the increasing demand for care and stretched resources, who in your organisation is ensuring that you have a resilient fundraising team who can spring back into shape when they are faced with knockbacks? When I looked up what resilience meant in the Oxford English Dictionary, it described, and I've used the word spring already, but as the ability for a substance, an object or a person to spring back into shape, the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. And my initial interest in this topic was sparked when I was doing my Masters at Hospice Leadership. And casting round for something to write my dissertation, I picked up the Hospice UK report that they'd commissioned from the point of care. And the document was called Resilience, a framework supporting hospice staff to flourish in stressful times. Fantastic, I thought. This will help me guide my team through difficult times. So I started to read all the way through it, and I came across a line that came to haunt me. And that line was, in the literature review, there was no work found covering any other aspect of hospice care apart from care staff. There was no information about fundraising resilience. And that sort of got under my skin a bit and led to me writing my dissertation on could we use the support that for clinical staff, could that be used with fundraisers, and actually what support goes into fundraising. I'm going to put that aside for today because there are two people on the stage with me who have a real insight into what is going on. I'm very pleased to introduce Claire Warner. Claire's going to speak first. Claire has been a fundraiser in hospice networks in the Northwest and is currently on the board of Forget-Me-Not Children's Hospice, specifically to look after income generation, as well as being a really busy fundraising consultant. I spotted that Claire was doing a survey across the whole fundraising sector, looking at how fundraisers felt about their jobs. So we had a conversation in the summer, and Claire has been pulling out the data from those hospice fundraisers who've completed her survey and will be sharing the findings, some of which might be very surprising to you. And then I'd really also like to welcome Hannah Massarella from Bird Consulting. So if Claire is going to talk about what people are saying, Hannah is going to talk about how we can all help our fundraising teams be more resilient, because with the increasing need for care, they're going to be even under more pressure. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Claire Warner.
Hello, crikey, I can see even less standing here than I could sitting over there. Hello, I'm Claire Warner and I have been a fundraiser since 1997. I would just like to know who we're speaking to today. I'd like, if we can, a show of hands. Who is actually, oh, that's better. Who is actually a fundraiser in the room? That's maybe half. Who has fundraising in their title in the room? Okay, who is clinical / care / nursing / no? Oh, one. CEOs, obviously, who are responsible for fundraising as well. That's a lot. Amazing. Finance. Ooh. HR. Amazing. Nice one. Hello. Thank you very much for coming. The clicker's not here. Give me 1 second. Sorry. Who's a trustee? Amazing. Thank you very much. So this is us. Why do your fundraisers need to be resilient? So Elizabeth has just shared a little bit of the background. I was a hospice fundraiser and a other charity fundraiser between 1997 and 2016. And in 2016, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I had a delicious time of treatment and chemotherapy. My treatment was successful, but when I came out the other side, I didn't have the get up and go to go and give 400% to my day job because I didn't have 400% of anything left to give. And I suddenly realised that I had written myself in my own head out of a further career in fundraising because I didn't think I had anything left valuable to give. And then I thought that was wrong because I believed I did have something valuable left to give, and the fact that I couldn't give 200 hours a week didn't mean that I was no longer any use to anybody. So then I started looking into how the well-being of our fundraisers, what we expect from our fundraisers, what our fundraisers expect from us, and how we cope with being a fundraiser in society today. So, yep, we have a definition of resilience, the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties and toughness. These are some of the things that cause your fundraisers to need to be resilient on a daily basis. Fake news, the Daily Mail, red tops, and the reporting of partial and not complete information. And your fundraisers are the people who are on the street facing the defence, the criticism, and having to deal with all of these stories before they can even ask anybody for money. If we look at a national perspective, annual UK giving has remained stagnant for 3 years at 10.1 billion. The number of people giving to charity and sponsoring someone in a charity has dropped for 3 consecutive years. Trust in charities is still declining. Continued public cuts mean services that are non-traditionally fundraising are now asking people for money too. And as organisations, we're still asking our fundraisers to go and do the same, to raise more with the same, or to raise the same with the same. And we're asking them all to buck the trend. If you look at it from a hospice perspective, there are more than 220 charitable hospices across the UK. Collectively, they need to raise over £1 billion each year. This year, 82% of hospices have said they're planning deficit budgets. And there is a fundraiser crisis where we're struggling to recruit and, more importantly, retain fundraisers. Then take it down to the hospice fundraiser level. They personally take responsibility for finding more money. They see and face competitor charities and causes popping up all the time. Often, and this is really important, their first contact with a family member is the receipt of a funeral gift. At no point in some hospices do fundraisers have any access to conversations with patients or their families any earlier than that. And they have to face, defend and convert all of the above. They have to buck the national trend. There is a varying commitment to fundraising and culture in the organisation, and still we need them to raise the money to open our doors on a daily basis. Earlier this year, the Union Unite did a survey amongst their members, a number of whom are charity employees, and these are some of the headlines about the charity employees. 80% of them reported workplace stress in the last 6 months. 42% of them believed their job was not good for their mental health, and 34% of them didn't feel valued at work. So as Elizabeth said, I had been looking at this for a while, and I decided that I wanted to find some fundraiser-specific information. This was not to be a woe is me, the poor fundraiser exercise. This was to be let's get an idea of what the actual picture is. Let's find examples of where people are doing some of this stuff really, really well, and let's help share some of those findings and help fundraisers be more resilient, be more healthy, and see more successful. So that was what I did. I founded Charity Well, research into the well-being of fundraisers. I got lots of criticism that I was only looking at fundraisers, so I added 2 words, and others. and they are classed as others, unfortunately. My bag is fundraising. That was what this was. I am getting perspectives, but my focus is about fundraisers. So part 1 was launched in May, and I went out asking people, what are the things that affect your ability to do your role? What are the things that affect your desire to do your role? And what are the things that affect your health while in your role? 133 people took part, and they had a lot to say. I was very surprised. Of the 133 people, 122 answered every question, and 100 answered them in sentences, not in bullet points. So taking the results from part 1, I then launched part 2 in October, and this was going out asking people, how often have you witnessed, experienced, or been impacted by the things that were highlighted in part 1? There was a general section of questions about their current wellbeing and satisfaction. There were detailed questions on the incidence and impact of those areas, and there was requests for examples of great practice to share. Now, that piece of research is still open, so I don't have the full findings to share with you today. What I have done is I have pulled out some pertinent ones for the hospice sector, and some where the comparisons between hospice and everybody else are interesting. So far, we've had 367 participants. 82 of them are from hospices. The survey is anonymous. I do not know who is answering the questions. I have asked for any examples to not name names or organisations, and in some instances people have, and I'm getting somebody else to remove them, so I don't know who those people are. That was really important to me, that people felt that they could be very honest. So the first question, that there was a marked difference, or currently there is a marked difference between hospices and the rest of the sector, and this is something I believe we should all take joy from and celebrate, was the question. I asked people to say to what extent they agreed to statements. This one, I am proud to work for my current charity. As you can see, nearly 61% of hospice fundraisers said they strongly agreed, compared to 47% in other charities. 29% agreed. So the skew towards the pride for working in our organisations is large in the hospice sector. And I thought that was A, amazing, B, reflected my own personal observations of people working in the hospice sector, and C, was something that we need to be mindful of when we're looking at the other areas. Second question, I rarely think of looking for a job with another charity. 23.5% of hospice fundraisers strongly agreed that they rarely thought of looking for another job. So the top 3, strongly agree, agree, and neither disagree. Neither agree nor disagree were obviously skewed in the hospice favour. My charity motivates me to go beyond what I would, what I would in a similar role elsewhere. Again, the figures are strongly skewed in the favour of hospices. This is where it starts to get a little different. There are good career opportunities for me at the charity. 50.91% disagree, and nearly 10% strongly disagree. The cumulative number of those far outweighs the cumulative number of the other. The disagree is massively different. My workload is achievable in the hours I'm paid for, was one question, and another question further on in the survey was, I rarely have to work more hours than I'm paid for in order to achieve what is expected of me. And as you can see, the hospice figures towards the disagree and strongly disagree were higher than the agree. And I don't know whether you can see at the bottom, it's very small. I rarely have to work more hours than I'm paid for. 58% disagreed. Then there was a full section on health and well-being. These slides are going to be available afterwards, so don't worry about, I'm not going to go through every line, I'm not going to go through but some of these are, whilst not yet a cause for concern, they certainly should be on your radar. The questions: my organisation is fully supportive of health and well-being and does all it can to minimise stress and ill health. 35% agreed, but 34% disagreed. So the numbers are evening off at this point. My organisation is good at supporting the health needs of its staff, and so on and so on. Now we get to the bits that concerned me. These are some themes I picked out. I've chosen the wording from individual ones, but they express the concerns of a number. There is an us and them culture. The nurses are angels and we are a necessary evil. This was a very specific one. In our all-staff meeting, our CEO explained that because fundraising hadn't achieved their targets, the hospice was going to have to make cuts. We are not allowed to speak to patients or family members, yet they want to support us. And this one, our founder's wife introduces me as the person who gets paid a large salary to do the job she used to do just as successfully as a volunteer. These are direct quotes. These are now figures. 12 people, this is 12 hospice people, not 12 people across the full research, gave details of being bullied. 5 of them were being bullied by trustees. 9 of them described having breakdowns. 17 talked about feeling stressed to the point of being ill, but not feeling they could take time off work. Now, I think some of that's quite worrying. I think that fundraising is a job I have absolutely loved doing for 22 years. I'm really, really, really proud to be a fundraiser. And I'm really, really proud of the work that I and people I have worked with, my teams, my organisations, the things that we have enabled and the people we have supported. But this is not a picture that I am confident about selling to the people who come behind me, and we do need to make some changes. So, as I said, the survey isn't yet closed. There are some things that we can do that our fundraisers or we can help to do to help themselves, but there are also some areas that are fundamental where we need to see change at a hospice and at a sector level. The survey is still open. You can take part there if you haven't done already, and if you haven't done, please do so, and please encourage everybody you know to do so. I would really like to get to 500 responses. The full findings will be written up next year and will be available early next year. But Hannah and I are going to then work together on some recommendations of what we can do in order to make the change that's necessary. She's now going to tell you some things that we can do literally from Monday when you get back in your office. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Just give me 1 second, sorry. Okay, so an introduction. So my name's Hannah. I founded Bird 5 or 6 years ago now, having worked in the not-for-profit sector myself. I originally started off as a fundraiser, 14 years ago for the British Red Cross. So I know the life of a fundraiser. I've also done some frontline work as well. And I completely burnt out doing all the various charitable work that I did, and found that there wasn't enough in the not-for-profit, charity, public sectors around resilience and well-being. So I set up Bird, and we now work with organisations across the sector. We do workshops and we do one-to-one coaching work as well. So what I'm going to talk to you about in the next 25 minutes is 2 things. So I think it's always important when you talk about resilience to talk both about how an individual can take care of their own resilience, but also how the structure and the culture can help to enable people to feel well, to feel resilient. So we're going to look at both those things. So first of all, we're going to look at psychological safety and the structure and culture of an organisation. And then I'm going to talk you through some ideas around how you can encourage your staff, your people, your teams, particularly your fundraisers, to take responsibility of their own resilience and do what they need to do. There will be a few opportunities to have some conversations. The invitation is to hold a safe space for each other, because obviously you might be sharing a few things about your organisation, maybe some personal concerns as well. So please do hold confidentiality and non-judgment with each other. I'm sure you would do that anyway. So I'm going to start by talking about psychological safety. Has anyone come across the concept of psychological safety before? And a couple of people. So it's a refresher for you and for everyone else. I'll talk you through it. So psychological safety is an idea that it was originally around in the 60s, but now there's a bit of an authority on it called Amy Edmondson. If you want to check her out, she's got some excellent TED Talks and books. And she describes psychological safety as a belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. So basically, it's about creating an environment where people aren't afraid of each other and not afraid to make mistakes. In my session today, I'll also be referencing Dr. Brené Brown, if anyone's heard of her. She's becoming quite well known now. But Brené Brown talks about psychological safety as being something where people can come to the workplace as their whole selves, like bring everything, bring all of themselves, and kind of not have this divide between work and home, because they do cross over. So another important piece, I think, which is worth talking about with psychological safety is a project that Google ran. I'd rather not be referencing Google, but it's quite a helpful project to look at. They created Project Aristotle, which was a 2-year project working with 180 teams on how to create the best team. They came out with 5 objectives. The first one was dependability, the next one was structure, the next one was meaning, the 4th one was impact, and the 5th was psychological safety. And I was looking at those 5 areas and I was thinking, well, I think a lot of organisations tick the dependability and the structure. We pay a lot of attention to that. Policies, procedures, we look at that. Meaning and impact, of course, as Claire's data showed, people feel proud to be working in this sector. People feel proud to be working in the hospice sector because there's meaning, there's impact. But then this 5th piece, this psychological safety piece, which Google found to be the most important, is often overlooked, and I think we really need to kind of dive into it. So Amy Edmondson talks about how psychological safety is needed when an organisation has any level of uncertainty and interdependence, which I think is every organisation. So it is really, really important to look at it. So as an example, I'm going to give you a few examples of what a psychologically unsafe team looks like, and then a psychologically safe team, and then I'm going to invite you to have a conversation about where your fundraising team sits with that. And if you're not part of a fundraising team, where your team fits with that as well. So a psychologically unsafe environment might be something like an environment of busyness and exhaustion. And that doesn't mean like people just busy. It means people wearing busyness as a bit of a badge of honour. A psychologically unsafe organisation is an organisation or a team where perfectionism is rewarded, emotional stoicism is rewarded. There's a false compartmentalising of our lives and work, which is what I was talking about before. It's where a team might champion a culture of all-knowingness. It's where it's an environment where tough conversations are avoided, passive-aggressive might show up. There might be something called the dirty yes, where people say yes to each other but no behind their backs. So there's all this kind of stuff that comes up with psychologically unsafe teams. And then a psychologically safe team is an environment of connection and inclusion. It's where individuals are deliberate about scheduling and connecting and self-caring. It's where individuals are honest about themselves, about how they feel, and leaders are honest with themselves about how they feel as well. It's where the team understands that work and life is messy. It's not just compartmentalized. There's mess. There's what I call VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. That's the kind of environment that we live and work within. So, with all of that information, I'd love for you to speak to the person next to you, have a conversation for a couple of minutes about where your team or your organisation is at in terms of psychological safety. Go for it. Does anyone want to share anything that came up in your conversations? Remember, we're a confidential, safe group.
I think we started talking, and having worked in and around the hospice sector for 20, 25 years as a fundraiser, a chief exec and other roles, to be honest with you, that the basic principle that I think many hospices always have, and many still do, approach is to decide how much money their service is going to cost, take off what they get from the government, and expect fundraising to raise the rest, which to me explains why there's a culture that you get the results that we talked about this morning. It's not a question of, let's have a proper discussion about how much we can genuinely expect to raise. Our business plan has been based on the premise that we'll raise more and more money from the same audience in the same ways, and somehow it will happen. And actually, common sense says that's not going to happen, and I've been doing some other work looking at the amount hospices are raising per head, and that does suggest that there is some kind of limit that you may get to at some stage. So I think that's just relevant because it's about the culture in which hospice fundraisers have to operate.
Yeah. How does that impact the psychological safety, if that's the kind of the weight on everyone's shoulders?
Well, I think it creates exactly the kind of situation that you explained in terms of the pride of busyness, in terms of, feeling we just have to get through this. Yeah. Forgive me for being indulgent, but the talk about about meeting people for the first time when they're bereaved, lots of hospices, from what I understand, still don't train their fundraising staff in how to work with people who've been bereaved. So they go down to reception and pick up a cheque and they're in tears, and that affects the resilience of the staff.
Yeah.
They should be trained because they are often dealing with people who are in a very difficult situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing. Does that resonate with other people? Yeah. Yeah. Does anyone else want to share any thoughts before I move on? Oh, a couple more down here. Oh, is there one up there? Oh,
Sorry,
great. Loads of us. We'll just have two more, I think, and then move on.
Hi, yeah, my name's Laura and I'm from Ashgate Hospice in Chesterfield, and I completely understand what everybody's saying, and I'm relatively new in post. I started in April. My background is mental health nursing and public health nursing, but I am reflective practice lead, and we've just been updating our policies on clinical supervision and support and reflective practice, which will encompass all staff, so that we will ensure that everybody gets the training, the supervision, and there will be individual reflective practice sessions for each staff member group. That will be housekeeping, maintenance, clinical admin, fundraising, clinical teams, so everybody will have an opportunity to access some sort of support, because I think what you're saying is so valid.
That's amazing. That's brilliant. Well done for creating that. I think there's two things. I'm going to be talking about some ways to create a psychologically safe organisation in a moment. I think there's some direct training that probably needs to happen for fundraisers who are dealing direct with people who have suffered bereavement. And there's all of the additional pieces like supervision, reflective practice, that, there's a multitude of things that need to come into play. So one more. There will be more chance to share later as well.
Hi, can I say hello to Claire? I'm David Houston from Trinity Hospice. Nice to see you.
Hello.
Claire's supporting us a bit at the moment. I think one of the really big challenges is that, this is really overly simplistic, but in one sense, fundraising is a form of sales. And our culture in the Western world around sales is around targets and going for the target, making the sale, having the resilience that if you only make 3 out of 10 sales, you can cope with that, and so on and so forth. And so we work within a really deep-seated sort of history there, which in itself makes it very difficult, I think, for any organisation to find a way through the pressures that come from that. But I was at a fundraising away day with the staff a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about targets and this concept of realistic targets, but stretching targets, and how do you work that out, and should there be targets, and so on and so forth. And I talked a bit more about, for me, it's more important about the journey than this. Does that mean we don't need targets? That was a bit of an interesting debate. But I am more interested in the journey in terms of, if we're being creative, if we're coming up with ideas, if we're testing stuff, and if ultimately we do things in a constructive and positive way, and say assumingly competently way, if actually we can't get to that destination as we assumed, that's not actually the team's fault, but it's how you give them the safety to feel that that's possible, and yet still the focus. Because we're all human beings at the end of the day, so we're not perfect. We all have egos and so on. So I'm quite interested, and you may come on to this a bit later on, is how do you square the sort of the need to have some type of focal point of view or target, for want of a better word, with the implicit stress that comes when you've maybe co-created a figure. Even if you've co-created it, it's still stressful if you're having a target.
Yeah, thank you. And that's annoyingly, I took the slide out. But if you do look at Amy Edmondson's TED Talk, she's got a really simple graph that speaks to what you've just been sharing about. And it looks at different zones that teams can work within. And hoping that my memory remembers it all. If you have a very psychologically safe team, but there's no drive, there's no motivation, there's no targets, for want of a better word, then it just becomes comfortable, and things don't get progress doesn't happen, targets don't get met, things don't move along. If you just have the targets, it's an anxiety zone. The team are anxious and overwhelmed and burning out and stressed. But there's this lovely kind of sweet spot in the middle where if you have both, it becomes a learning zone. So you have to have that psychological safety alongside that kind of motivation and drive and aim to achieve at the same time. So, moving on, I'm going to share with you some ideas now on how to create a psychologically safe organisation. I think we don't have a great deal of time today, so I'm just going to give you a few ideas, and I think there is a lot more probably specific ideas that you will maybe be prompted to think of in relation to fundraising teams specifically. But so I'll start with Amy Edmondson again. So she talks about 3 things that are needed to create a psychologically safe organisation. The first one, again, speaks a little bit to the last comment there, is about seeing work as a learning problem rather than an execution problem. So rather than constantly hitting the targets or trying to create perfectionism, seeing it more as how can we come together, how can we learn together, how can we grow together, how can we make mistakes together. The second piece that Amy Edmondson talks about is acknowledging your fallibility. So this is really important for leaders to acknowledge that they're human and fallible, but also everyone in the team. If there's an invitation for everyone to be human and make mistakes, that's a really great way to create psychological safety. And you can do that by just saying, okay, I might miss something here. I might need you to tell me that again. I need your help, basically, or I made a mistake. So that's about being fallible. And the third piece that she talks about is modelling curiosity. So again, particularly for leaders, kind of asking a lot of questions, getting curious about, actually not particularly for leaders, I think for the whole team, being curious and having that permission to ask lots of questions and find out more, and having that kind of agreement within teams that no question is a stupid question. I think that's really powerful for creating psychological safety. So at Bird, when we work with organisations, we often teach three things, along with many others, but I wanted to bring 3 ideas today that are hopefully things you could take back into work on Monday. So the first one is leading on from modelling curiosity, and it's creating a coaching culture. So not necessarily have everyone have a coach, but more have everyone understand the key basic elements of a coaching culture. So being able to ask really simple, open questions, being able to ask things like, what do you need? How can I help? What else? What's next? Avoiding the question why, because the question why often puts people on the back foot. You can ask why in relation to a thing, like why is this responding like this, chemical responding like this. But if you ask a person why they did something, defences go up immediately and they feel quite attacked and it's quite unsafe. So yeah, with coaching, there's tons of things you can look at. If you look at on Google, the GROW model. If you look on there, there's a load of simple questions that you can find on there. So the second strategy that we talk to teams about is something called an honest check-in. So with Google's research, the key thing that they found about psychological safety was that a way to create it is to encourage people to show sensitivity to others' feelings and needs, and to model listening to each other. So the honest check-in is a three-part process. So it's about you having the team together and have each member of the team have probably about 3 minutes each, so a time-bound slot. And that, within that time-bound slot, they're not interrupted, so it's uninterrupted time. So in that 3 minutes, the team member gets the opportunity to say how they feel, how that's impacting them, their work, and then the third piece is what they need from others. So the reason it's time-bound is that people could go off and kind of say, I need the world, but that time-bound opportunity to just air what's going on for them. This strategy can feel quite messy and quite scary at first, so it can take a few rounds for a team to feel really comfortable with it. But it does really create that level of psychological safety once you get a bit further down the line with it. If you are going to implement it next week, I'd encourage you to give everyone a bit of a heads up about it as well, so that they can think about what they'd share. And then the third approach is, it comes from this book. I don't know, you won't be able to see it, but it's a Brené Brown book called The Gifts of Imperfection. And it's about, it can feel or seem a bit, woo-woo is not the right word, but a bit light as a strategy, but it's essential to cultivate an environment of laughter, she talks about song and dance, but like play, creativity, that kind of essence. And organisations that we work with will put on, awards events or away days, but I think it's really important to integrate it into the day-to-day. I've had examples of chief execs just pulling up a chair and having a chat with staff, people, the water cooler moment, people having permission to just lean back and connect. And what that does, and I think it's really important for fundraising and creativity, is when you get that chance to kind of step back and maybe lean into a bit of fun, a bit of lightness, you actually step out of what's it? Oh, I forgot my words. Where you respond. Oh, help me out. What's it when you kind of respond? Fight or flight, that's it. So the fight or flight mode, you step out of fight or flight and you step into rest and repair. So when you're in rest and repair, you're better able to make creative decisions, to be more productive, to think your way through challenges. So it's really essential to tap into that space. So I'm going to invite you again to have a conversation with the person next to you, a couple of minutes, and then we'll hear back a couple of ideas about how you might implement some of these strategies to your team. Go for it. Okay, everyone, sorry to cut your conversation short. We don't have a great deal of time, so I'm just going to run through the last second to last slide I think I have, and then there'll be opportunity for more conversation, won't there? So the last piece that I wanted to talk to you about, we've talked about how you can create that safe culture, but also there's a whole piece around inviting and inspiring individuals to take their own responsibility for their well-being as well, and their personal resilience. There's tons of ways you can do that. Things like, and I'm sure you all have, employee assistance programs, coaching, well-being budgets is something I've come across. Stuff like cycle schemes, well-being days, resilience workshops. There's a whole plethora of things you can invite individual staff to get involved with. There's one particular strategy I just want to briefly run through with you because it's something you might want to implement on Monday, and it's something called a co-created resilience plan. And this, I got this idea from an organisation called the Energy Project. It's a US organisation. But it's quite a simple strategy that really invites the team to get involved. So it's a matter of getting the team together and having them particularly look at when busy periods might be coming up, but looking at a year, like a year-long plan, identifying when it's going to be particularly busy, and then together coming up with some ideas. So the Energy Project worked with an organisation and came up with these as examples, like I've put it in the wrong order here. So when you arrive at work, doing your most important work first, for the first 60 to 90 minutes, they all agreed, this particular team all agreed to take at least a 30-minute lunch break, which actually led to them having lunch together, which created more connection, which is a really important part to feeling well and feeling resilient. And then when they stopped working for the day, doing something that transitioned from work to home, and also doing something before sleep that allowed them to get a decent night's sleep. So there was an element of them doing some of it together and holding each other accountable, but there were also some of those pieces where they could individually own what might work for them. And there were I won't go through all the stats of what came back after that project, that pilot group happened, but the stats were great. Like this particular team retained a load of staff that the previous year they lost, and it was just a really simple and effective process I'd encourage you to look at with your team. So in conclusion, I can see it there. So burnout decreases, I can't see it there. Burnout decreases and retention increases when an organisation prioritises psychological safety and personal resilience. And psychological safety is about creating that organisation where people, or a team where people don't experience punishment or humiliation, where they share ideas. There are loads of ways to implement psychological safety. I've shared a few with you today. Similarly, there are loads of ways to implement personal resilience as well. And if you want to find out more, I've got a sign-up sheet if you want to get on our mail list and you can get some more information. I don't really know how to do that. I'll send some sign-ups around. That's it. Thank you very much.
I've been sitting there thinking of some of the team meetings I ran as a Director of Income Generation, and actually I'm quite ashamed that I concentrated very much on the targets rather than some of the issues that Hannah raised. So a lesson learned. We have a few minutes before the end of the session. Are there any questions that people would like to raise either with Hannah or Claire or myself, or if you want to share some examples, then Gemma is the lady with the mic.
Thank you. Really interesting, and I think the whole, resilience is such a topical discussion all the time. It's about how people develop the skills to actually facilitate some of these discussions. I think within hospices there's a huge amount of rescuing that goes on all the time. So if somebody's overwhelmed, they're rescued. But it's about the longer term resilience of that, and it's putting in a programme to support that. These short, quick wins are fine for the moment, but it's a skill. It's a bit like within the clinical staff, they talk about having those difficult conversations and advanced communication skills and training. That needs to cascade into all the areas for staff, because people actually don't know how to do that active listening and what to do with it in order to support people. So I think we can have all the theory. It's about how do we put it into action and sustain that action. So the psychologically safe place is, again, it's quite an in vogue thing, and I think it's really, really important. But people need to know how and what to do in the safe space.
So is that working with HR teams, maybe drawing on resources from clinical colleagues and spreading that right across the whole organisation, maybe? Because I know hospices, we do invest a lot in some of these issues, but for some reason it doesn't always seem to go right across the organisation. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And there was a lady in the middle there, Gemma.
Hi, I'm Sarah from St Margaret's in Somerset. At day 3 of the conference, I have brave enough to speak, so thank you for psychological safety. I just wanted to share a little bit about, we do a half-day communication session for all our new staff now. And that was very much driven from our fundraisers, talking about exactly what you were talking about, saying we have had these difficult conversations, we have no idea how to deal with patients, families in the right way. And that seems to have also given confidence to other parts of the organisation that also have contact with patients and families, like IT, for example, who were also struggling. So the rather sneaky thing we did was include it on the induction checklist, and people are just signing up to that course, and we're running it as a programme, and it is going some of the way to meeting particular needs.
Thank you. I think one of the findings from the work I did was the total lack of understanding in some organisations about the exposure fundraisers had to bereaved families, the pressures that can build. People donate to hospices, they get quite attached. The fundraising is often is part of the bereavement process, about how do you deal with families who sometimes become over-reliant on that fundraiser. And they were issues that weren't, people felt weren't being addressed, the actual exposure to families and the death and dying process. As a personal example, I was walking through reception one day and we had a memory tree. I'm sure many of you have a memory tree. And I saw a gentleman quite distressed. So I shot over and said, are you okay? And he said, well, it's my wife. It's our wedding anniversary and I've come to chat to my wife. So I said, oh, that's great. Would you like a cup of tea? Oh, that's lovely. My stepson's parking the car. So we had a little chat and I said, so, when you leave here today, what are you going to do? And he said, I'm going home and I'm killing myself. And I took a deep breath, and I'm not a young slip of a thing, so I said, would you like another cup of tea? And while I put the kettle on, I rang through to psychological support and said, could you just walk through the patient lounge in about 2 minutes, because I think I need you. And we had a conversation with this gentleman, and his stepson had then by that time came in, and he agreed to come in and see. He'd refused bereavement counselling in the past, but we put in an emergency meeting for him the next day. And I just walked away and I thought, thank God it was me that found him in reception rather than one of my brand new fundraisers, because I'm not sure, A, what they could have done, and B, the effect it would have had on someone. And I just had 2 new people start that day. If that had been the first conversation they had with a patient's family, and I did go back and we did start looking at that whole issue of working with families. So I'm afraid that's quite a depressing story to end the session. Are there any final questions before I thank our panel? Yes. Gentleman in the front. Thank you, Gemma.
So I think the quote about you being a slip of a thing could be an interesting one. Going back, sorry, just for people around me, this is my wife in front of us, we are a hospice family, so I can be rude to her. Claire.
No, you can't.
Claire, your survey looks absolutely fascinating. So 2 very quick questions firstly, and then a third one. But the 2 quick ones, how much further is it open for, and when will the final results be out?
Well, because it's my survey, and because when I tried to gain interest from umbrella organisations into the fact that I was doing this survey, other people were very interested in seeing the results at the end, but not interested in helping me get it sorted out. I don't know why I've got this number, but I've got a number in my head of I would like to get 500 people to take part. I think that's a robust number of people. It opened in October. I would like to see it close around Christmas so that I've got time to properly look at the results. I am working with a research department of a local university to help me make sure that my own personal influence on any of those answers is not skewed into the findings. So I would imagine end of February, beginning of March next year. And then, like I say, it's that what can we do about it that's far more important, because just a piece of research that says this is how people feel at a particular point in time is useful, but not as useful as, so now what do we do and how do we... And some of it is Some of it is sour grapes, and I absolutely accept that. Some of it is very sour grapes, and some of it definitely isn't. And we need to make sure that we use the information in a rational way. But I don't suspect that anybody next year is planning on cutting their services by half and therefore with their income by half. And this is a problem that is going to continue. And we have to find a way through it where we don't just lose the best people, or we don't actually cause people to become ill themselves. I don't for 1 minute suggest that I was made ill by work. I definitely wasn't. But what I realised was, if I wasn't willing to work 10-hour days, 6 days a week, I couldn't go back into the job that I was in. And I wasn't willing to do that. Therefore, I couldn't go back into the job. It was self-selecting. And we need to make sure that we create a culture where people don't need to work 10 hours a day, 6 days a week in order to feel that they can do that job. And that was where I came from. I do have to say there are some really, really amazing examples of tiny little things that people do that could make huge change that are in there. But there are also some really frustrating ones. So there are 2 organisations, they're not hospices, who have implemented wellbeing programmes, but they still expect their staff to work 10 hours additional each week. And it's like, well, don't have the wellbeing programme, just get your working hours sorted out, and they would be far better off. Okay. So it's those kinds of things that aren't rocket science, but well-being has in some cases become a tick box exercise where you go, oh yeah, we've got a plan now, so we've done that bit. And it's not. It's got to be about people and people's lives, because our fundraisers are people, as are our nurses, as are our patients, as are our donors. So we need to treat them like people, not like the silos that we currently place them in. That's what I'm hoping to do. So the very short answer to your question is some point early next year. But if you sign up to take part, you'll get a copy of the results.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sure everyone here, and perhaps Hospice UK, can encourage it through the networks as well, so get
Thank
the
you.
500. And the last question was particularly, perhaps unsurprisingly, the hospice fundraisers scored more highly in a lot of the areas you focused on, but not under the opportunities for development, and that doesn't entirely surprise me. So I suppose to what extent, well, some sub-questions around that. To what extent were do you think the other responders may have been more from bigger charities where opportunities could be bigger? And two, I don't know if this is a bit of work for Hospice UK, but I would love to see examples from across the hospice network where hospice fundraising teams have cracked being able to give teams more opportunities for development, because we're struggling with it, and I'm sure it's difficult for most smaller teams, but ideas on that would be really appreciated.
We have promoted Claire's survey through Income Generation Bulletin, and I will, on more than one occasion, and now we know about it, I'm more than happy to repeat that so we can get that hospice number up, because I think it really is a fascinating piece of research. I am going to bring the session to a close. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for coming here, and I'd like a final round of applause for Claire and for Hannah. Thank you.